When a family loses their home to foreclosure, when the sheriff arrives with eviction papers and gives them 72 hours to pack up a lifetime of memories and leave the house they thought they owned, most people assume the bank is simply recovering what they are owed, taking back property to offset the unpaid mortgage debt. But what if I told you that in many cases, the bank makes more money from the foreclosure than they would have made if you had kept paying your mortgage for the next 30 years, that the entire system is designed not to keep you in your home, but to push you into default at exactly the right moment to maximize their profit? This is not speculation. This is documented in court cases and bankruptcy filings and investigative journalism that has revealed a business model so predatory that even seasoned financial analysts are shocked when they see the numbers. Because we are not talking about banks reluctantly taking losses on bad loans. We are talking about financial institutions that have turned foreclosure into a profit center, that have departments dedicated to extracting maximum value from your misery, that have literally bet against you keeping your home and structured their compensation systems to reward employees who push families into foreclosure, even when modification would be possible. Let me tell you about a woman in Florida named Lisa, who took out a mortgage in 2006 to buy a modest 3-bedroom house for $240,000, putting down 20%, which was $48,000 she had saved over a decade of working 2 jobs. And for the first 3 years, she never missed a payment, never was even late. She was exactly the kind of borrower that banks claim to want. But then in 2009, her husband lost his job during the recession, and their household income dropped by 60% overnight. And when she called the bank to explain the situation and ask about modification options because she had heard about government programs to help struggling homeowners, she was told to submit paperwork documenting her hardship, and they would review it for possible assistance. She submitted everything they asked for: pay stubs and tax returns and bank statements and a hardship letter explaining the situation. And then she waited and called every week to check on the status. And every time she called, she got a different person who claimed they could not find her paperwork and asked her to resubmit everything. And this went on for 7 months, during which time she kept trying to make partial payments because she wanted to show good faith. But the bank refused to accept partial payments. They said she had to pay the full monthly amount or nothing. So the account went into arrears and late fees started accumulating. And then the bank informed her that she was being referred to their foreclosure department. Now here is where it gets truly diabolical, and I need you to understand this because it explains everything about how the system actually works versus how we are told it works. During those 7 months when Lisa was trying to get a modification and the bank was supposedly reviewing her case, they were not really trying to help her. They were running out the clock because once a mortgage is 90 days delinquent, it triggers a series of fees and charges that start generating revenue for the bank and their affiliated services. We are talking about late fees of 5% of the monthly payment. We are talking about property inspection fees, where the bank sends someone to drive by the house and take a photo and charges $200 for this 30-second task. We are talking about attorney fees for foreclosure proceedings, where the bank uses law firms that they own or have relationships with and charges those legal costs to the borrower's account, even though the borrower never hired these attorneys and has no say in their selection. And all of these fees compound, meaning that if a fee is not paid immediately, it gets added to the principal balance and starts accruing interest. So a $200 inspection fee becomes $210 the next month, and $221 the month after that. And when you have multiple fees hitting every month for months or years during a foreclosure process, the total can easily reach $50,000 or $60,000, which gets added to what the borrower owes, but goes directly into the pockets of the bank and its affiliated companies. But the real profit comes from something even more insidious, something that was exposed during investigations after the 2008 financial crisis, but that most Americans never learned about because it was too technical and too complicated for the mainstream media to explain effectively. And that is the securitization model combined with credit default swaps and insurance policies that allow banks to get paid multiple times on the same mortgage. Here is how it works. And pay attention because this is the part they absolutely do not want you to understand. When you take out a mortgage, that loan typically does not stay on the bank's books for very long. Instead, it gets sold to an investment bank, which bundles it with thousands of other mortgages into a mortgage-backed security that gets sold to investors like pension funds and insurance companies and foreign governments. and the original bank that made the loan becomes the servicer, meaning they collect your monthly payments and pass them through to the investors after taking a servicing fee. But here is the key. When you default on your mortgage, when the loan goes into foreclosure, the servicer continues to collect fees even though you are not paying, because all those late fees and inspection fees and legal fees get charged to your account and ultimately get recovered either from insurance policies or from the eventual sale of the property or from payouts from credit default swaps that the bank purchased as insurance against defaults. And this is where it gets truly sick, because the banks bought credit default swaps that paid out more than the actual value of the mortgage, essentially betting that you would default and structuring their exposure so that they would make money when you lost your home. Imagine a system where the bank that is supposed to be helping you keep your house has a financial incentive to push you into foreclosure because they make more from the insurance payout than they would make from 30 years of your mortgage payments. This is not theoretical. This was exactly what Goldman Sachs and other banks were doing in the years leading up to the crisis. They were creating mortgage-backed securities that they knew were likely to fail, selling them to unsuspecting investors, and then buying insurance against those same securities so they would profit when the mortgages defaulted, and the investors who bought the securities lost everything while Goldman Sachs made billions. And none of this would have been possible without homeowners being pushed into foreclosure, because that is what triggered the payouts. If you are feeling sick right now, if you are starting to realize that the financial crisis was not an accident, but a designed outcome that benefited the banks at the expense of millions of families who lost their homes, then you are beginning to see what really happened. And if you want to understand how this is still happening today, in slightly different forms with slightly different mechanisms, but the same basic incentive structure, then subscribe right now, because what I am about to reveal will show you that the foreclosure profit machine never stopped running. It just got better at hiding itself. But first, let me finish Lisa's story, because what happened to her illustrates every single aspect of this predatory system and will help you understand why the banks fought so hard against meaningful reform even after their practices were exposed. After 7 months of being strung along with false promises of modification review, Lisa received a foreclosure notice informing her that she owed not just the original mortgage balance plus the missed payments, but an additional $42,000 in fees and charges that had accumulated during the foreclosure process, bringing her total debt to over $300,000 on a house that was now worth only $180,000 due to the collapse in property values during the recession. She tried to fight it, hired a lawyer with money borrowed from family, and in discovery the attorney found that Lisa's modification paperwork had never actually been lost. It had been deliberately ignored, because the bank's internal metrics rewarded foreclosures over modifications. Literally, the people in the modification department were evaluated and compensated based on how many modifications they denied rather than approved, because completed foreclosures generated more fee income for the bank than modified loans that stayed current. The case went to mediation, where the bank offered Lisa a modification that would have added all the fees to the principal balance and extended the loan term to 40 years at a higher interest rate, essentially condemning her to pay the bank for the rest of her working life for a house that was underwater and that she might never actually own. And when she refused this terrible deal and insisted on a fair modification that would reduce the principal to the actual current value of the property, the bank withdrew the offer and accelerated the foreclosure. The house eventually sold at auction for $150,000, $30,000 less than its market value, because foreclosure auctions are designed to benefit investors who buy properties below market, and the banks do not care about maximizing sale price because they are already made whole through insurance and fees. And after the sale, Lisa still owed over $60,000 because Florida is a recourse state where the borrower remains liable for any deficiency between what the property sells for and what is owed. So she declared bankruptcy and spent the next 7 years rebuilding her credit, while the bank that destroyed her life reported record profits that quarter and paid bonuses to the executives who had designed the system that pushed her into foreclosure. And the most infuriating part is that internal bank documents revealed during litigation showed that Lisa had qualified for a standard modification under the government's HAMP program, that if the bank had processed her paperwork properly and offered her a fair modification, she would have been able to keep her home and keep making payments. But the modification would have generated only the normal servicing fees, while foreclosure generated 10 times as much in fees, plus the insurance payout, plus the ability to sell the property and potentially go after her for the deficiency. So the economic incentive was entirely on the side of foreclosure, even though it destroyed a family and destabilized a neighborhood, and ultimately cost the taxpayers money through various government insurance programs that paid out to cover the losses. Now multiply Lisa's story by 10 million families, because that is approximately how many homes were foreclosed on between 2007 and 2014, and you begin to see the scale of the wealth transfer that occurred, conservatively estimated at over $1 trillion taken from American homeowners, much of it funneled to Wall Street through fees and insurance payouts, and properties sold below market value to investors who flipped them or rented them, or simply held them until the market recovered. And what makes this even more enraging is that the banks were able to do this while simultaneously receiving hundreds of billions in taxpayer bailouts ostensibly, to help them survive the crisis that they had created. So we the taxpayers were funding both sides of the transaction. We were bailing out the banks so they could foreclose on us. And then when we lost our homes, the government insurance programs we had paid into through our taxes were covering the bank's losses, while they kept all the fees and proceeds for themselves. But here is what they really do not want you to know, and this is the part that should make every American question whether we live in anything resembling a just or functional system. Many of the foreclosures that happened during the crisis were legally dubious or outright fraudulent, because in the rush to securitize millions of mortgages, the banks had failed to properly transfer the ownership documents and maintain the chain of title as required by centuries of property law, meaning that in many cases, the entity initiating foreclosure did not actually have the legal right to foreclose because they could not prove they owned the mortgage. This became known as the robo-signing scandal, when it was revealed that banks had hired people to sign thousands of foreclosure documents per day without reading them or verifying any of the information, literally just signing their name over and over to legal documents, swearing under oath that they had personal knowledge of the facts when they had no such knowledge, which is perjury, and should have resulted in criminal prosecutions. But instead, the banks paid small fines that were tiny compared to the profits they had made, and nobody went to jail. And when homeowners tried to challenge foreclosures by demanding that the banks produce the original note proving they had the right to foreclose, which is a basic legal requirement that has existed for hundreds of years, the banks went to judges and argued that technical requirements about showing the note were outdated in the modern electronic age, and that homeowners were just trying to get free houses by exploiting technicalities. And judges, many of whom did not understand the complexities of securitization and who were under political pressure to move cases quickly through overcrowded foreclosure courts, sided with the banks and allowed foreclosures to proceed even when the banks could not prove they owned the mortgage. This was a fundamental breakdown of property rights and rule of law, because if a bank can take your house without proving they have the legal right to do so, then nobody truly owns anything. We all just occupy property at the pleasure of financial institutions that can seize it whenever they decide it is profitable to do so. The question you should be asking yourself is whether this could happen again, whether the incentives and the mechanisms that drove the foreclosure crisis have been fixed, or whether they are still in place, waiting for the next economic downturn to activate them. And the honest answer is that very little has changed, because the banks fought against every meaningful reform, and Congress was unwilling to confront them effectively because of campaign contributions and lobbying and the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. The Dodd-Frank Act, that was supposed to prevent another crisis, was watered down before passage and has been further weakened since. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that was created to protect homeowners from predatory practices, has been under constant attack and has had its budget and authority reduced, and the Justice Department declined to prosecute any major bank executives for fraud or misconduct during the crisis, sending a clear message that there are no consequences for behavior that destroys millions of lives as long as you are rich and powerful enough. So right now, today in late 2025, there are families struggling to make mortgage payments in an economy where inflation has driven up costs while wages have stagnated, where adjustable rate mortgages that were taken out at low rates are resetting to higher rates, where home equity lines of credit that people use to consolidate debt or pay for home improvements are coming due, And when these families call their services asking for help, they are being told the same things Lisa was told 15 years ago. Submit your paperwork, we will review it, call back in a few weeks to check on the status, and meanwhile the fees are accumulating and the foreclosure clock is ticking and the bank is calculating whether they make more money by modifying your loan or by foreclosing and collecting all the fees and insurance payouts. Do you still believe that banks are on your side, that they want you to succeed and keep your home, that the mortgage system is designed to help people achieve the American dream of home ownership? Or are you starting to see that you are not a valued customer, but a revenue source, that your home is not your castle, but an asset on the bank's balance sheet that they will seize the moment it becomes more profitable than letting you keep it? These are uncomfortable questions because they undermine the fundamental narratives we are told about how the economy works and who it serves. But refusing to ask them does not make you safe, it just makes you vulnerable. Here is what you need to understand if you currently have a mortgage or are thinking about getting one. The servicer who collects your payments is not your friend and is not working in your best interest. They are working for the investors who own your mortgage and for themselves, and their incentive is to maximize fee income and minimize costs, even if that means pushing you into foreclosure. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you might miss a payment, document everything, every phone call, every piece of paper you submit, every conversation you have, because you will need that documentation if you end up in foreclosure and want to challenge it, and do. Not trust anything the servicer tells you verbally. Get everything in writing, because servicer employees are trained to say whatever is necessary to keep you on the phone and prevent you from taking actions that might actually help you, like hiring a lawyer or contacting a housing counselor. And if you are already in foreclosure or facing the possibility, know that you have rights. Even though the system is designed to make you feel powerless, you have the right to demand that the bank prove it owns your mortgage. You have the right to challenge fees that are excessive or fraudulent. You have the right to demand that your modification application be processed in a reasonable time frame, and you have the right to take the bank to court if they violate any of these rights, though be aware that banks have unlimited legal resources and will drag out litigation for years, hoping you give up or run out of money for attorneys. This is asymmetric warfare, where the bank can absorb losses and delay tactics indefinitely while you are fighting for your home and your family, and they know this and use it to their advantage. The broader question is, what kind of society allows this to happen? What kind of legal system permits banks to profit from the misery of their customers? What kind of political system is so captured by financial interests that even after the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, we cannot muster the will to meaningfully reform the institutions that caused it? These are questions that go beyond mortgages and foreclosures to the very foundation of how power operates in America, and the answers are deeply disturbing because they suggest that we no longer live in a democracy where citizens have meaningful input into the decisions that affect their lives, but rather in an oligarchy where concentrated wealth translates directly into political power and policy outcomes. If this has fundamentally changed how you see the banking system and your relationship to it, if you understand now that your mortgage is not just a financial arrangement, but a potential trap that can be sprung at any moment for the bank's benefit, then you need to watch what we reveal next, because the foreclosure profit machine is just one part of a larger system of extraction and exploitation that touches every aspect of your financial life, from credit cards to student loans to retirement accounts. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, share this with everyone you know who has a mortgage or is thinking about buying a home, because knowledge is the only protection we have against institutions that have more money and more lawyers and more political influence than we can ever hope to match individually, but collectively. If enough people understand how the game is rigged, we might be able to force changes that make the system work for us rather than against us. The tragedy of foreclosure is not just the loss of a house, it is the loss of faith in the idea that if you work hard and play by the rules, you will be protected by those rules. But what we have learned is that the rules are written by and for the banks, and when those rules stop serving them, they simply change the rules or ignore them and face no consequences. This is the reality we live in, and pretending otherwise does not make you safe. It just makes you the next Lisa, the next family that loses everything while the bank celebrates another profitable quarter, and the executives who designed the system buy another vacation home with their bonuses.